now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, because we're having us a barbecue. President Joe Biden has given his son Hunter Biden a presidential pardon, even though he said he would not in the past.
Major about face from President Biden after he ended the long holiday weekend, announcing a full pardon for his son Hunter.
And for months, the president had said he would not pardon his son after his convictions for gun and tax crimes, but he's now calling the whole thing, quote, a miscarriage of justice. News 6's Mark Lehman's following the story this morning. Mark, the decision not sitting well with Republicans.
No, not at all. President-elect Trump is blasting the pardon, essentially calling it an abuse of power. President Biden, meanwhile, says his son was unfairly targeted because of political motives.
With less than 50 days in office, President Biden is giving a full and unconditional pardon to his son Hunter. It's a complete reversal from the president's own repeated messaging.
I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
In a statement released last night, President Biden says he changed his mind about clemency for his son because he thinks he was unfairly targeted and believes politics has caused a miscarriage of justice. Hunter Biden was set to be sentenced this month and faced 42 years in prison. It was in connection to a federal gun conviction in Delaware and 9 counts of tax fraud in California.
I think what happened in this case is the pendulum sort of swung from one extreme to the other, and you ended up with an outcome that the president felt necessary to issue a pardon on.
The move is already seeing outrage on the political landscape. In a social media post, President-elect Trump called it a miscarriage of justice and alluded to pardons in connection with January 6th.
Now, Mark, does this pardon only kind of cover recent convictions or everything?
Well, it actually goes back to cover all potential crimes from roughly the past decade. That could be a lot. That span includes Hunter Biden's controversial tenure on the board of a Ukrainian gas company.
Now, in a shocking turn of events to some, President Joe Biden made an about-face to statements that he made in the past regarding his son, Hunter Biden, and decided to give his son, Hunter Biden, a full presidential pardon. Now, in the past, President Joe Biden said that he would honor whatever verdict that the federal courts made regarding his son, regarding his trials for tax evasion and possession of and purchase of a firearm. And Joe Biden, on a tweet on Twitter, stated that no one is above the law. Well, it looks like Joe Biden has decided to walk away from those statements that he made in the past regarding looking to honor the laws of the U.S. Constitution, and also looks to compromise his moral integrity as he invokes the unwritten laws of white supremacy to pardon his son for all of the crimes he had been convicted of. Now, Hunter Biden was just about to be sentenced to possibly 42 years in prison for the series of crimes he had been convicted of, until Joe Biden decided to come along and look to go out here and pardon his son, Hunter Biden, for all of the crimes that he wound up committing and being convicted of. Now, this whole about face basically puts Joe Biden in a place where he's looking a lot optically like a hypocrite, looking like a hypocrite because he was the one who went out here and said he would stand by whatever verdict that the courts and the jury handed down as related to his son, and also said that no one was above the law. But it's clear to me that when it comes to Joe Biden, the only law that he follows is not that of the U.S. Constitution, but the law of white supremacy. And the ultimate law of white supremacy for many of these white individuals like Joe Biden is, I'm white and I say so. And because Joe Biden says so, his son will be pardoned. And that really shows how Joe Biden's whole approach to law has nothing to do with our U.S. Constitution and rule of law, nor does it have anything to do with morality or integrity. No, when it comes to the system of white supremacy, white people have a privilege given to them by white supremacy where they can go out here and say whatever or do whatever they please, and there's no sense of accountability whatsoever. No, there's no sense of accountability whatsoever as related to the system of white supremacy, especially when it comes to white males. No, a white male can basically go out here and participate in a series of crimes like Hunter Biden has done, and there will be a parent who will go out here and enable whatever dysfunctional behavior that their child participates in, and this is the unwritten covert contract of white supremacy that has been instituted ever since its inception. And basically what's happening here with Hunter Biden is he's never going to be punished by any sort of man in the system of white supremacy because his father is white and he says so. And before he winds up leaving office and leaving this world, he's giving his son one final present in looking to give him his freedom, even though he's been convicted of crimes, and giving him that freedom because that's part of the white privilege that he was given as being the son of a wealthy politician. That's all part of the white privilege that Hunter Biden has as related to being a white man in the system of white supremacy. And Joe Biden really doesn't care how this looks for him optically because as an 80-plus-year-old man, he basically believes that he's going to be leaving this world after he leaves office. And because he believes he's going to be leaving this world after he leaves office, he doesn't feel like he's going to be accountable for anything in this world. And he's thinking, oh, I gave my son his freedom, and I'm going to be able to get away from all of this. And basically, that shows how little regard he has for the God he's supposed to be serving. I mean, here's a guy who puts himself in the place of God, because that's basically what Joe Biden is doing, because that's what many white supremacists do. They basically make themselves into gods, and they make themselves into gods believing that they basically have a right to do whatever they please without ever being accountable to anyone. And that basically shows how full of it they are, because I find it interesting that Joe Biden can go out of his way to go out here and give a pardon to his crack-smoking, drug-addicted son, but he had next to no mercy for all of the black people who he basically incarcerated in a prison industrial complex during the time he basically instituted the crime bill of 1994 that he instituted and implemented in place with the help of Bill Clinton and the Republican Congress. I mean, Joe Biden had no problem going out here incarcerating black people, especially heterosexual black men in mass, for, in some cases, crimes they didn't commit, because a lot of times when it came to black men, they basically were incarcerated under the 94 crime bill, basically for minor things like basically riding in a car with a dude that they didn't even know that there was contraband in the car. Basically, a lot of black men wound up doing 10, 15, 20 years in prison for just getting a ride in a car or basically talking to someone. But Hunter Biden, a white male, can go out here, smoke all the crack that he wants, and nobody really does anything. They basically give him, if they do find him, they go out here and give him rehab. But a black man winds up losing his freedom, all for getting a ride in a car or going and talking to someone who they didn't know was involved with the drug game during the war on drugs. And it was Joe Biden's policy that also incarcerated lots of black men as related to changing the ratios for powder cocaine and crack cocaine, even though black men basically, again, were just hosed by this whole policy. Hunter Biden gets to go free, and it just shows how full of it Joe Biden is, and just shows us how this white supremacist in his last days in office basically has no regard for many of the laws that he took an oath to defend under the U.S. Constitution, because as he took this oath to defend the U.S. Constitution, he was supposed to honor the laws But Joe Biden basically looked to invoke white supremacy, showing how he believed that he was above the law. Because when it comes to white supremacists in most cases believe that they are God. And since they are God, they believe that they can do whatever they please. And that's the main reason why Joe Biden is pardoning Hunter Biden and having no qualms about it, saying things like, oh, his son was being persecuted. Well, what about all of the black men who were persecuted by his Department of Justice during the so-called war on drugs, which was actually a war on black people? Critical question I have to ask Joe Biden and the Biden administration with this whole hypocritical stance that they're taking regarding Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden can smoke all the crack he wants, but the black men out here, when they got locked up for just, again, being an accessory to things that they didn't even know that they were doing, they got the book thrown at them, but he looks for mercy from the criminal justice system for his son and gives mercy to his son, showing me how Joe Biden is no different than the Pharisees and the Sadducees that Jesus had to deal with in the time of Rome, showing me how he's no different than the Pharisees and the Sadducees as related to the chapters in the Bible where he talked about the debtor who basically, again, went out here looking for mercy, but then after getting mercy, went to another man and then went out here and attacked him, went out here and attacked this other man, even though he asked for mercy. And this was basically what made his Lord very angry as related to this situation. And I believe God himself, I believe he is not pleased with the hypocritical actions of Joe Biden, which basically show how little integrity that Joe Biden has as related to his character, because for this president to do this in the last days of his office, to go out here and compromise his integrity, shows how little character that he has, and basically is another reason why many of the black folks out here really need to take a look at Joe Biden with a side eye. I mean, here's this white guy who will go out here and pardon his son for these crimes, who's been smoking crack, but he had no mercy on foundational black Americans who in many cases had trumped up charges placed against them as related to many cases of this war on drugs that took over the course of the 1990s and early 2000s, which led to many black people having, especially heterosexual black men, having their whole lives completely derailed. I mean, there were so many brothers out here who had their lives derailed, and Joe Biden basically just has no regard for those black people, like he had no regard for black people during the 2020 election, where he expressed his contempt for foundational black Americans by telling us to work with Hispanics and telling us to work with Hispanics after getting black people to take their booties to the poll in a, again, expression of contempt with that ad, and again, basically showing no respect for black people. This whole pardon, again, shows how little regard Joe Biden has for the so-called rules and rule of law, because the only rule of law that Joe Biden follows is the rule of white supremacy. And because he only follows the rule of white supremacy, he believes that he is justified in going out here and looking to keep his son free, even though his son has been convicted by a trial of a jury of his peers and held accountable, even though his family was held accountable as related to this crime, as related to things. Again, according to our Constitution, once a person has a trial by the jury of their peers and they're convicted, they're supposed to be punished. But we see in the system of white supremacy, nobody really follows those rules. Nobody really follows those rules when there's a white person being on trial. No. Just like the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, where they basically rigged the trial and looked to get the outcome that they wanted, or in this case, they basically got an outcome that they didn't want. So they basically threw out the rules, and that's just basically the way it is in the system of white supremacy. It's basically they just do whatever they say when a white man is in charge. And there have been people on the red side getting upset about this, and I really just see them as being disingenuous, because the same thing happened with Donald Trump, where they looked to go out here. You had these black bootlegs like Alvin Bragg and Letitia James looking to go out here and believe they could get convictions against Donald Trump. But we see that those sentences are basically being postponed or set aside. And again, basically what we're seeing on both sides is the system of white supremacy working the way that it's supposed to, because in the system of white supremacy, there's the one ultimate law, in that if a white man says it, it is the gospel, because the white man is a god in his own eyes. He's a god in his own eyes who believes that he is above the law, even though he says no one is above the law. No, when it comes to the white supremacists, they always believe they are above the law, and this law basically is one where the ultimate judge has to be Jesus Christ, who has to deal with these individuals. And eventually what happens to these individuals is that since they go out here and participate in unjust law, this is where God has to step in and mete out his justice. And in his justice, this is where these people basically eventually wind up under the universal law of God, which is because God is not mocked. No, whatever a man will sow will reap. And like the late Charles Stanley used to say, a man will reap more than he sows, later than what he sows, greater than what he sows. He will reap more than he sows, greater than what he sows, later than what he sows. And is related to the Biden family. Either they're going to reap what they sow at the end of their time in this world, which is what Joe Biden is basically reaping what he sowed. That's why he basically lost this election before even Kamala Harris decided to run. And his son eventually will reap what he sows, later than what he sows, greater than what he sows, and the whole system of white supremacy will eventually reap what it sows, later than what it sows, greater than what it sows, and it will be a bitter harvest when the system falls, because the system is an unjust system. It is not about going out here and following rule of law. It is not about going out here and doing what is right. It is not about any sort of moral position. No, the system of white supremacy, again, is all about making sure that anyone white can go out here and do whatever they please without any semblance of accountability or responsibility. That is what the system of white supremacy is in a nutshell. That even though there are laws in place and a person can be convicted by a jury of their peers, they will set aside that verdict because he's white and he says so. And because he's white and he says so, he basically will give his son that privilege of being able to maintain his freedom, even though this boy has basically taken his entire life for granted, to the point where all he does is go out here and use drugs and go out here and participate in deviant and antisocial behavior. Because he's white, he's given a pass to continue participating in a debaucherous lifestyle, all because he's white and he says so. And that just shows how this white supremacist system allows the white supremacists to abuse not only our laws, but abuse their freedom, because this person, again, your whole purpose in life is to get your soul right with God so that you can be a part of the kingdom. But this person doesn't want to follow the rules of the kingdom, because there's nothing in the system of white supremacy but anarchy and chaos, covered up with a facade to make it look like they're keeping up the appearance of law and order, when in actuality they just do whatever they please, and then use the rules, enforce the rules on black people most of all. No, everybody else in the hierarchy of white supremacy can go out here and do whatever they please as long as it's to black people. But if they go out here and do it to white people, then they want to enforce the law. And that just shows how hypocritical the system of white supremacy is, because there's no real law and order. No, it's just chaos all around. Chaos all around because there's no sense of accountability, because the white supremacist, again, has this whole image of themselves as a god. This is why I call it a religion of white supremacy. It's a religion of white supremacy, and because these people believe that they are God. They believe they are above God. And this is why they believe they are above the law, because they believe they are above God. And since they believe that they are above God and are gods in and of themselves, this is why they believe it's perfectly fine for Hunter Biden to get a pardon. And I'm not even going to get into the back and forth that people have as related to blue and red, because they're both anti-black. And with them both being anti-black, they create two sets of rules in two worlds, one black and one white. And when it comes to the white, there is no real rule of law. It's whatever they choose to do. And because Joe Biden is white and he says so, he says his son will be free regardless of whatever crime he was convicted of. And this has been the rule of white supremacy ever since the institution was established as a religion, as related to the Church of White Supremacy. And with this being the rule of the church, again, this is not a rule of justice that God would establish with his kingdom, because his kingdom is true justice. And again, this is not justice at all. And the whole thing is when it comes to this type of thing, again, Joe Biden will reap what he sows, greater than what he sows, later than what he sows, because God is not mocked by Joe Biden. No, eventually, sooner or later, Joe Biden will meet justice, whether in this life or the next, where he's burning in hell. That will be either of the two choices for Joe Biden, because clearly he's not following God or serving God. No, this is a guy who basically looked to compromise with the devil. And as he compromised with the devil in the last days of his presidency, he shows that he doesn't serve God. No, Joe Biden, the practicing Catholic, just is another servant of the institution of white supremacy, and his God is himself, because he believes that he's white and he says so, so he doesn't have to follow the rules of law as related to man or the rules of the standards of God. Now, if you want to check out some of my books on the SJS Direct imprint and learn more about the subtle politics transpiring around you, you can pick up my book, The Temptation of John Haynes, which goes in depth as related to the subtle politics transpiring around people. And you can find that book and other books in the John Haynes series on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me make more videos taking politicians like Joe Biden and his son Hunter to the barbecue, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback at e-readers, ISIS, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get your copy of ISIS, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.